Good afternoon, everyone. We are reading from Maria Valtorta, the poem of the Man God, this afternoon between the hours of noon and 3. And we will be doing sections. I'll read a section. After that section, we'll have a 10 to 15 minute meditation in silence. And then Devi will read a section, and then we'll do another meditation and back and forth until the reading is done. If at any time you need to take a break, the meditation time is a good time, but of course, do what you need to do. So let's settle in. Take a couple of deep breaths as we begin the way of the cross from the Praetorium to Calvary. Some time goes by, so not more than half an hour, perhaps even less. The Longinus, who is entrusted with the task of superintending the execution, gives his orders. But before Jesus is taken outside into the street to receive the cross and set out, Longinus, who has looked at him twice or three times with a curiosity that is already tinged with compassion and with the expert eye of one who is accustomed to certain situations, approaches Jesus with a soldier and offers him a refreshment, a cup of wine, I think. In fact, he pours a light blonde, rosy liquid out of a real military canteen. It will do good. It will do you good. You must be thirsty, and the sun is shining outside, and the way is a long one. And Jesus replies to him, "May God reward you for your compassion, but do not deprive yourself of it. I am healthy and strong. I am not depriving myself. And even if I were, I would do it willingly to give you some solace, a draught to show me that you do not hate heathens." Jesus no longer refuses and takes a draught of the drink, as his hands are already untied and he no longer has the cane or the chlamys. He can do it by himself. But he refuses to take more, although the good, cool drink should be a great relief to his fever, which is already showing itself in the red streaks that inflame his pale cheeks and his dry lips. "Take some, take it. It is water and honey. It will give you strength and quench your thirst. I feel pity for you. Yes, pity. It was not you who was to be killed among the Jews. Who knows? I do not hate you, and I would try to make you suffer only what is necessary." But Jesus does not drink anymore. He is really thirsty, the dreadful thirst of those who have lost much blood and are feverish. He knows that it is not a drink with narcotics, and he could drink it willingly, but he does not want to suffer less. But I realize, as I understand what I am saying through an internal light, that the compassion of the Roman is of greater solace to him than the water that is sweetened with honey. "May God reward you with his blessings for this solace," he then says, and he smiles again, a heart-rending smile with his swollen, wounded lips, which move with difficulty. Also, because the severe contusion between his nose and his right cheekbone, caused by the blow with the cudgel he received in the courtyard after the flagellation, is swelling considerably. The two robbers arrive, each surrounded by a decury of soldiers. "It is time to go," Longinus gives the last instructions. A sentry is set out in two lines, at about 3 meters from each other, and moves thus into the square, where another sentry has formed a square barrier to drive the crowd back, so that it may not obstruct the procession. In the little square, there are already some mounted soldiers, a cavalry decuree with a young non-commissioned officer who commands it and has the ensign. A foot soldier is holding the bridle of the centurion's black horse. Longinus mounts and goes to his place, and 2 meters in front of the 11 mounted soldiers. The crosses are brought. Those of the 2 robbers are shorter. Jesus's is much longer. I say that the vertical stake is not less than 4 meters long. I see that it is already assembled when they bring it. With regard to this matter, I read when I used to read, that is years ago, that the cross was assembled on the top of Golgotha, and that along the way, the condemned men carried only the 2 poles bundled together on their shoulders. Everything is possible, but I see a true cross, well-formed, solid, perfectly mortised at the crossing of the 2 arms and well reinforced with nails and screw bolts at the junction. And in fact, if one considers that it was destined to support a substantial weight, such as the body of a grown-up person, and had to sustain it also in its last convulsions, one understands that it could not be assembled there and then on the narrow, uncomfortable top of Calvary. Before giving the cross to Jesus, they tie the board with the inscriptions, Jesus, Nazarene, King of the Jews, round his neck. And the rope holds it, gets entangled with the crown, which is moved and scratches where it is not already scratched, and pierces new parts, causing fresh pain and making fresh blood spout. The people laugh with sadistic joy. They abuse and curse. They are now ready, and Longinus gives the order of march. First the Nazarene behind him, the 2 robbers, a decuree around each of them, the other 7 decurees positioned on the flank as reinforcements, and the soldier who allows the condemned men to be wounded mortally will be held responsible. Jesus comes down the 3 steps that from the lobby take one into the square, and it is immediately clear that Jesus is extremely weak condition. He staggers coming down the 3 steps, hammered by the cross weighing on his shoulder, all covered with sores. By the board of the inscription that weighs in front of him, cutting into his neck, by the oscillations caused to the body by the long stake of the cross, which bounces on the steps and on the uneven ground. The Jews laugh, seeing him stagger along like a drunk man, and they shout to the soldiers, "Push him, make him fall, in the dust, the blasphemer." But the soldiers do only what they have to do. That is, they order the condemned one to stay in the middle of the road and walk. Longinus spurs his horse, and the procession begins to move slowly. And Longinus would also like to make haste, taking the shortest route to Golgotha, because he is not sure of the resistance of the condemned one. But the unstrained mob, and it is even an honor to call it so, does not want that. Those who are cunning have already run ahead to the crossroads where the road forks, going towards the wall along the one way and towards the town along the other. And they riot, shouting, when they see Longinus try to take the way towards the walls. "You must not do that. You must not. It is not legal. The law prescribes that condemned men are to be seen in the town where they sinned." The Jews at the rear of the procession realize that at the front they are trying to defraud them of a right, and they join their shouts to those colleagues. For peace sake, Longinus turns along the way that takes toward the town and goes a short distance along it, but he beckons to a decurion to approach him. I say decurion because he is not commissioned officer, but perhaps he is what we would call an orderly officer. And he says something to him in a low voice. The man trots back, and as he meets each decurie commander, he conveys the order. He then goes back to Longinus to inform him that it has been done, and finally he goes to the place where he was previously in the line behind Longinus. Jesus proceeds panting. Each hole in the ground is a trap for his staggering feet, a torture for his shoulders covered with wounds, and for his head crowned with thorns. Also, because the sun, which is exceedingly warm, although now and again it hides behind a laden awning of clouds, shines perpendicular on it. So even it is concealed, it still burns. Jesus is congested with fatigue, fever, and heat. I think that also the light and the howling must be a torture for him. And if he cannot stop his ears in order not to hear so much coarse shouting, he hath closed his eyes not to see the road dazzling in the sunshine. But he must also reopen them, because he stumbles over stones and holes, and each stumble is painful, as it jerks the cross, which knocks against the crown, which rubs against the wounded shoulder, widening the sores and increasing the pain. The Jews cannot hit him directly any longer, but odd stones and blows with cudgels still strike him. The former, particularly in the little squares crowded with people, the latter, instead, at bends along the narrow streets with frequent steps going up or down, at times 1, at times 3, at times 4, because of the continuous variations of the ground. The procession is compelled to slow down at such places, and there is also some volunteer who challenges the Roman lances with, if only to add a finishing touch to the masterpiece of torture that Jesus is by now. The soldiers defend him as best they can, but they strike him as well while trying to defend him, because the long lances waved about in such narrow spaces knock against him and make him stumble. But upon arriving at a certain spot, the soldiers make a perfect maneuver, and notwithstanding shouts and threats, the procession deviates abruptly along a street that goes directly toward the walls, downhill, a good short cut to the place of execution. Jesus is panting more and more. Perspiration is streaming down his face, together with the blood that trickles from wounds of the crown of thorns. And dust sticks to his wet face, leaving clear stains on it. Because also the wind is blowing now, continual gusts at long intervals, during which the dust falls after being raised in whirlwinds by each gust and is blown into his eyes and throat. Many people have already assembled at the judicial gate, that is, those who providently and in good time have chosen a good place to see. But shortly before arriving there, Jesus almost falls. Only the quick intervention of a soldier on whom he almost falls prevents him from falling on the ground. The rabble laugh and shout, "Leave him. He used to say to everybody, 'Rise, let him rise now.'" Beyond the gate, there is a stream and a little bridge. Walking on the uneven boards is a new fatigue for Jesus, as the long stake of the cross bounces on them even more violently. And there is a new mine of projectiles from the Jews. The stones of the stream fly and hit the poor martyr. The ascent to Calvary begins, a barren road without the least shade, paved with uneven stones, that goes straight up the hill. Here again, when I used to read, I read that Calvary was a few meters high. It may be so. It is certainly not a mountain. But it is a hill not certainly lower than the mount of the cross itself. With respect to the Langarni, where the Basilica of Saint Miniato is in Florence, someone may say, oh, not much. Yes, for one who is healthy and strong, it is not much, but it is enough to have a weak heart to feel whether it is much or little. I know that after I began to suffer from heart trouble, even in only a mild form, I could no longer go up that hill without suffering great deal, and I compelled to stop now and again, and I had no load on my shoulders. And I think that Jesus's heart must have been in a very bad state after the flagellation and sweating blood, and I take only these two things into consideration. So Jesus suffers tremendously in climbing, also because of the weight of the cross, which being so long must be very heavy. He finds a protruding stone, and as he is exhausted, he can lift his feet only a little, so he stumbles and falls on his right knee. And he can hold himself up with his left hand. The crowd howls with joy. He gets up again. He proceeds, bending and panting, more and more congested, feverish. The board that swings in front of him obstructs his sight. His long tunic, the front part of which trails on the ground, as he now walks bending, hampers his step. He stumbles again and falls on both knees, hurting himself where he is already wounded, and the cross, which slips out of his hands and falls after striking his back violently, compels him to bend to pick it up and to toil painfully to put it back on his shoulder. While he does so, one can clearly see on his right shoulder the wound made by the rubbing of the cross, which has opened to many sores and scourges, making them all into one, from which serum and blood transsued, so that spot on his white tunic is all stained. The people even applaud for the joy of seeing him fall so badly. Longinus orders to make haste, and the soldiers, striking with the flat of their daggers, press poor Jesus to proceed. He sends out again more and more slowly. Despite all the solicitations, Jesus seems completely intoxicated as he sways so much, knocking against one or the other line of the soldiers, wandering all over the road, and the people notice it and shout, "His doctrine has gone to his head. Look, look, how he staggers." And others, they are not of the people, but priests and scribes, say with a grin, "No, it is still the fumes of the banquets in Lazarus' house. Were they good? Take our food now," and other sentences of the kind. Longinus, who turns round now and again, feels sorry for him and orders a few minutes' stop, and the rabble insults him so much that the centurion orders the soldiers to charge them, and the faint heart crowds at the sight of the shining, threatening lances run away shouting and hurling themselves here and there down the mountain. It is here that among the few people who have remained, I again see the small group of the shepherds appear from behind some ruins, probably of a collapsed low wall. They are desolate, upset, dusty, in rags, and with the power of their glances, they attract the master's attention. He turns his head round. He sees them. He looks at them fixedly as if they were the faces of angels. He seems to quench his thirst and fortify himself with the tears and the smiles. The order to resume the march is given, and Jesus passes just in front of them as he hears their anguished weeping. With difficulty, he turns his head round from under the yoke of the cross, and he smiles once again. his solace, 10 faces, a rest in the burning sun. And immediately afterwards, the pain of the third fall, a complete one. At this time, he does not stumble. He falls because of a sudden lack of strength due to this syncope. He falls headlong, knocking his face on the uneven stones, and he remains in the dust under the cross that falls on him. The soldiers try to raise him, but as he seems to be dead, they go and inform the centurion. While they go and come back, Jesus comes to himself, and slowly, with the help of 2 soldiers, one of whom lifts the cross and the other helps the condemned one to stand up, he puts himself in his place again, but he is really exhausted. Make sure that he dies only on the cross, shout the crowd. If you let him die beforehand, you will answer to the pronouncio. Bear that in your minds. The culprit must arrive alive at the execution place, say the chief scribes to the soldiers. The latter cast withering glances at them, but discipline prevents them from speaking. But Longinus is just afraid, as the Jews, that the Christ may die on the road, and he does not want to have troubles. Without needing to be reminded, he knows what is his duty as officer responsible for the execution, and he takes action. He takes action disconcerting the Jews, who have already ran ahead along the road, that they have reached from all over the mountain, sweating, scratching themselves to pass among the few thorny bushes and the bare burnt mountain, falling on the rubble, encumbering it as if it were a dump for Jerusalem, without feeling any pain except of missing the panting of the martyr. One of his sorrowful glances, a gesture, even an involuntary one, of suffering, and with no other fear but that of not being successful in having a good place. So Longinus gives the order to take the longer road that winds up the mountain, and therefore not so steep. The road seems a path that by dint of being used by many people has changed into a rather comfortable road. This crossroad is situated about halfway up the mountain. But I see that farther up, the straight road is crossed four times by this one, which climbs with a slighter slope, and to compensate for this is much longer. And many people are going up this road, but they do not participate in this shameful uproar of people possessed who follow Jesus to take delight in his tortures. They are mostly women, weeping and veiled, and some small groups of men, very small ones indeed, who are much ahead of the women and are about to pass from sight when, going on their way, the road turns round the mountain. Calvary here looks somehow pointed in its odd structure, which is snout-shaped at one side, whilst on the other side is drops sheer. The men disappear behind the stony point, and I lose sight of them. The people following Jesus are shouting with rage. It was more pleasant for them to see him fall while hurling obscene imprecations at the condemned one and of those leading him. Some followed the judicial procession, and some go on almost running up the steep road to make up for the disappointment received by having a very good position on the top.
The women who are proceeding weeping turn round upon hearing the shouts and see the procession turn toward them. They stop, leaning against the mountain, lest they should be pushed down the slope by the violent Jews. They lower their veils on their faces even more, and there is one completely covered with her veil like a Muslim, leaving only her very dark eyes free. They are sumptuously dressed, and they have a strong old man to defend them. But all enveloped as he is in his mantle, I cannot see his face clearly. I can only see his long beard, which is more white than dark, stick out from his very dark mantle. When Jesus arrives near them, they weep more loudly and bow low to him. Then they move forward resolutely. The soldiers would like to drive them back with their lances, but the one who is all covered like a Muslim moves her veil aside for a moment before the ensign, who has just arrived on horseback to see what is the cause of this new hindrance, and he orders the soldiers to let her pass. I cannot see her face or her dress because of the shifting of the veil, which is done with the speed of a flash, and her dress is all concealed under a heavy mantle that reaches down to the ground and is completely closed by a set of buckles. The hand that comes out from there for a moment to shift the veil is white and beautiful, and it is the only thing, in addition to her very dark eyes, that can be seen of this tall matron, who is certainly influential if she is so promptly obeyed by Longinus's adjutant. They approach Jesus weeping and kneel at his feet while he stops, panting. And yet he still knows how to smile at those compassionate women and at their escort who uncovers himself to show that he is Jonathan. But the guards do not let him pass, only the women. One of them is Johanna of Chuza, and she is more haggard than when she was dying. Only the traces of her tears are red, all her face is snow white with her kind dark eyes, which, dimmed as they are, seem to have become a very dark violet shade, like certain flowers. In her hand she has a silver amphora and offers it to Jesus, but he refuses it. In any case, he is so breathless that he would not have been able to drink. With his left hand he wipes the sweat and blood that trickles into his eyes, and that streaming down his purple face and neck, the veins of which are swollen through the labored throbbing of his heart, wets all his tunic at the chest. Another woman, who is accompanied by a young maidservant holding a small casket in her arms, opens it and takes out a square piece of very fine linen cloth and offers it to the Redeemer. He accepts it, and as he cannot manage by himself with one hand only, the compassionate woman helps him to take it to his face, watching not to knock against his crown. And Jesus presses the cool linen cloth to his poor face and holds it there, as if he felt a great relief. He then hands the linen cloth back and he says, "Thank you, Johanna. Thank you, Nike, Sarah, Marcella, Eliza, Lydia, Anne, Valeria, and you. But do not weep for me, daughters of Jerusalem, but for your sins and for those of your town. Bless Johanna for not having more sons. See, it is God's mercy not to have sons, because they suffer for this. And you too, Elizabeth, better as it was that among and you mothers weep for your sons, because this hour will not pass without punishment. And what a punishment it is for the innocent. You will weep then for having conceived, suckled, and for having more sons. The mothers of those days will weep, because I solemnly tell you that we will be lucky who then will be the first to fall under the ruins. I bless you. Go home, pray for me. Goodbye, Jonathan. Take them away." And in the midst of the loud noise of weeping women and cursing Judeans, Jesus sets out again. He is again completely wet with perspiration. Also the soldiers and the other two condemned men are perspiring, because the sun this stormy day is as burning as flames, and the side of the mountain, very warm by itself, increases the heat of the sun. What this sun must feel like on Jesus' woolen garment placed on the wounds of the scourges. One can easily imagine and be horror-stricken at the idea, but he never moans. But although the road is not so steep as the other one, and it is not strewn with uneven stones, which were so dangerous to his feet that he is now dragging, Jesus is staggering more and more, and once again he knocks first into one line of soldiers and then into the other, and is bent more than previously. They decide to overcome the difficulty by passing a rope around his waist and holding the two sides of it as if they were reins. It does in fact support him, but it does not make his load any lighter. On the contrary, the rope, knocking against the cross, shifts it continuously on his shoulder and makes it strike the crown, which by now has turned Jesus' forehead into a bleeding tattoo mark. Further, the rope rubs against his waist, where there are many wounds, and it certainly makes them bleed again. In fact, his white tunic is tinged with pale red at the waist. So in order to help him, they make him suffer more. The road continues. It goes round the mountain. It comes back almost to the front, toward the steep road. Here there is Mary with John. I should say that John has taken her to that shady place behind the slope of the mountain to give her some relief. It is the steepest part of the mountain. There is no other road going round it. Above and under it, the slope rises or descends steeply, and that is why the cruel people have abandoned it. It is shady there because I should say that it is the north, and Mary, leaning as she is on the mountainside, is protected from the sun. She is leaning against the slope, standing, but already exhausted, panting, as white as death in her very dark blue dress, which is almost black. John looks at her with desolate pity. He has no trace of color on his face either, and he looks wan, with wide open, tired eyes, unkempt, and his cheeks are sunken as if he were suffering from a disease. The other women, Mary and Martha of Lazarus, Mary of Alphaeus and Mary of Zebedee, Susanna from Cana, the mistress of the house, and some more whom I do not know, are all in the middle of the road looking to see whether the Savior is coming. And when they see Longinus arrive, they rush toward Mary to inform her. And Mary, supported by John, who is holding her by the elbow, departs from the hillside, stately in her grief, and places herself resolutely in the middle of the road, moving aside only at the arrival of Longinus, who from the height of his black horse looks at the pale woman and at her blonde, wan companion, whose meek eyes are blue like hers. And Longinus shakes his head while passing by, followed by the 11 soldiers on horseback. Mary tries to pass through the dismounted soldiers, who, being warm and in a hurry, strive to drive her back with their lances. All the more that stones are thrown from the paved road as a protest against so much compassion. It is the Jews who once again curse because of the halt brought about by the pious women, and say, "Quick, it is Easter tomorrow. Everything must be accomplished by this evening. You are accomplices who deride our law, oppressors, death to the invaders and to their Christ. They love him. Look how they love him. Well, take him. Put him in your cursed eternal city. We surrender him to you. We don't want him. Let rotters be with rotters and leprosy with lepers." Longinus gets tired, and followed by the 10 lancers, he spurs his horse against the reviling pack of hounds, who run around for the second time. And in doing so, he sees a cart standing still, which has certainly come up from the vegetable gardens at the foot of the mountain, and is waiting for the crowds to pass, so that it may go down toward the town with its load of greens. I think that curiosity has made the man from Cyrene and his sons go up there, because it was not necessary for him to do so. The 2 sons, lying on the top of the green pile of vegetables, look and laugh at the fleeing Judeans. The man instead, a very strong man, about 45 years old, standing near the little donkey, which is frightened and tries to draw back, looks attentively at the procession. Longinus looks up and down. He thinks that he can be useful, and says to him in a commanding voice, "Man, come here." The man from Cyrene feigns he has not heard, but one cannot trifle with Longinus. He repeats the order in such a way that the man throws the reins to one of his sons and approaches the centurion. "Do you see that man?" he asks. And in doing so, he turns round to point out Jesus, and he sees Mary, who is imploring the soldiers to let her pass. He takes pity on her and shouts, "Let the woman pass." He then resumes speaking to the man from Cyrene. He cannot proceed further, laden as he is. "You are strong. Take his cross and carry it in his stead as far as the summit." "I cannot. I have the donkey. It is restive. The boys cannot hold it." But Longinus says, "Go, if you do not want to lose your donkey, and get 20 blows as punishment." The man from Cyrene dare no longer react. He shouts to the boys, "Go home and be quick, and say that I am coming at once." And he then goes toward Jesus. He reaches him just when Jesus turns toward his mother, whom only now he sees coming toward him, because he is proceeding so bent and with his eyes almost closed as if he were blind. And he shouts, "Mother." Since he began being tortured, it is the first word that expresses his suffering. Because in that cry there is the confession of everything, and all the dreadful sorrow of his spirit, of his morale, of his body. It is the heartbroken and heartbreaking cry of a little boy who dies all alone, among tortures and the most cruel tortures, and who goes so far as to be afraid of his own breathing. It is the wailing of a raving little boy tormented by nightmare visions, and wants his mummy, his dear mummy, because only her fresh kisses soothe the ardor of his fever. Her voice dispels phantoms, her embrace makes death less fearful. Mary presses her hand against her heart as if she had been stabbed, and she staggers lightly. But she collects herself, quickens her step, and while going toward her tortured son with outstretched arms, she shouts, "Son!" But she says in such a way that whoever has not got the heart of a hyena feels it is breaking because of so much grief. I notice signs of compassion even among the Romans, and yet they are soldiers accustomed to slaughters, marked by scars. But the words mother and son are always the same for all those who, I repeat it, are not worse than hyenas. They are understood everywhere, and they raise waves of compassion everywhere. The man from Cyrene feels such pity, and as he sees that Mary cannot embrace her son because of the cross, and that after stretching her arms out, she lets them drop, convinced that she is unable to do so, and she only looks at him, striving to smile with her smile of a martyr to encourage him, while her trembling lips drink her tears, and he, turning his head around from under the yoke of the cross, tries in his turn to smile at her and send her a kiss with his poor lips, wounded and split by blows and fever. He hastens to remove the cross, and he does so with the gentleness of a father, in order to not give a shove to the crown or rub against Jesus' sores. But Mary cannot kiss her son. Even the lightest touch would be a torture for his torn flesh, and Mary refrains. And then the most holy feelings have a profound modesty, and they exact respect, or at least compassion, whilst here there is curiosity and above all mockery. Only the two anguished souls kiss each other. The procession, which sets out again under the pressure of the waves of the furious people, divides them, pushing the mother against the mountain to be sneered at by all the people. Behind Jesus there is now the man from Cyrene with the cross, and Jesus, freed of that weight, is proceeding more easily. He is panting violently. He often presses his hand against his heart, as if he had a great pain or a wound there in the sternum heart region. And now, since his hands are no longer tied and he is able to do so, he pushes his hair, which has fallen forward and is sticky with blood and perspiration, behind his ears, to feel some air on his cyanotic face. He unties the cord around his neck, as it makes him suffer in breathing, but he can walk better. Mary has withdrawn with the women. She follows the procession once it has passed, and then, along a shortcut, she turns her steps toward the top of the mountain, defying the insults of the cannibalistic populace. Now that Jesus can walk freely, the last stretch of the road around the mountain is soon covered, and they are already close to the top, crowded with shouting people. Longinus stops and orders his men to inexorably repel everybody farther down, so that the top, the place of the execution, may be free. And one half of the century carries out the order, rushing to the spot and mercilessly driving back whoever is there, making use of their daggers and lances to do so. The hail of blows with the flat of swords and clubs makes the Jews run away from the top, and they would like to stop in the open space below, but those already there do not give in, and the people begin to brawl fiercely. They all seem to be mad. As I told you last year, the top of Calvary is shaped like an irregular trapezium, slightly higher on the right side, after which the mountain descends steeply for more than half of its height. In this little open space, there are already 3 deep holes lined with bricks or slates. That is, built for a special purpose. Near them, there are stones and earth ready to prop the crosses. Other holes instead are full of stones. It is obvious that they empty them each time according to the number required. Under the trapezoidal summit, on the side of the mountain that does not descend steeply, there is a kind of platform that slopes down gently, forming a second little open space. 2 wide paths depart from it, going round the top, which is thus isolated and raised at least 2 meters in height on all sides. The soldiers who have driven the people away from the top with convincing blows of their lances subdue quarrels and make room so that the procession may pass without any hindrances on the last stretch of the road. And they remain there, forming a double hedge, while the 3 condemned men, surrounded by the soldiers on horseback and protected behind by the other half of the century, arrive at the spot where they are stopped, at the foot of the natural raised platform that is the summit of Golgotha. While that takes place, I see the Marys, and a little behind them is Johanna of Chuza, with the other 4 ladies mentioned previously. The others have withdrawn, and they must have gone by themselves because Jonathan is still there, behind his mistress. The one we call Veronica, and whom Jesus called Nike, is no longer there, and also her maidservant is absent. And also the one who was all covered with a veil and was obeyed by the soldiers is no longer there. I can see Johanna, the old woman named Eliza, and the mistress of the house where Jesus went for the vintage in the first year of his public life, and 2 more whom I cannot identify. Behind these women are the Marys, and I see Joseph of Simon of Alphaeus, and Alphaeus of Sarah, with the group of the shepherds. They have scuffled with those who wanted to repel them, insulting them, and the strength of these men, increased by their love and grief, has been so powerful that they defeated their opponents, forming a free semicircle at which the very pusillanimous Jews dare only to hurl cries of death and shake their fists, but nothing else, because the crooks of the shepherds are naughty and heavy, and these valiant men lack neither strength nor the ability to aim accurately. And I am not wrong in saying so. It takes real courage for a few men, known as Galileans or followers of the Galilean master, to oppose a hostile population. It is the only place on the whole of Calvary in which Christ is not cursed. The mountain on the 3 sides on which the slopes descend gently toward the valley is all crowded with people. The yellowish barren earth can no longer be seen. In the sun that appears and disappears, it looks like a flowery meadow with corollas of all colors. So numerous and close together are the headgears and mantles of the sadists standing there. More people are beyond the torrent on the road and more beyond the walls, and there are more on the terraces which are closer. The rest of the town is deserted, empty, and silent. They are all here. All the love and all the hatred, all the silence that loves and forgives, all the clamor that hates and curses. While the men responsible for the execution prepare their instruments, finish emptying the holes, and the men condemned await in the middle of the square formed by the soldiers, the Jews who have taken shelter in the corner opposite the Marys insult them. They insult also the mother. Death to the Galileans, death. Galileans, curse them. Death to the Galilean blasphemer. Nail on the cross also the womb that bore him. Away from here, the vipers that give birth to demons. Death to them. Clear Israel of the females who copulate with the billy goat. Longinus, who has dismounted, turns round and sees the mother. He orders his men to stop the uproar. The 50 soldiers who are behind the condemned men charge the rabble and clear the second esplanade completely, as the Jews run away along the mountain, treading on one another. Also the other soldiers dismount, and one takes the 11 horses, in addition to that of the centurion, and takes them to a shady spot behind the ridge of the mountain. The centurion sets out toward the top. Johanna of Chuza moves forward and stops him. She gives him an amphora and a purse. She then withdraws, weeping, and goes toward the edge of the mountain with the other women. Everything is ready on the summit. They make the condemned men go up, and once again Jesus passes near his mother, who utters a groan, which she tries to stifle by pressing her mantle against her lips. The Jews notice it, they laugh and deride. John, the meek John, who has one arm around Mary's shoulder to support her, turns round and glares at them. Even his eyes are phosphorescent. If he did not have to protect the women, I think that he would grip one of the cowards by the throat. As soon as the condemned men are on the fatal platform, the soldiers surround the open space on 3 sides. Only the one that drops sheer is empty. The centurion orders the men from Cyrene to go away, and he goes away, unwillingly now. I would not say out of sadism, but out of love. In fact, he stops near the Galilean, sharing with them the insults that the crowds give liberally to these haggard believers of the Christ. The 2 robbers throw their crosses on the ground, swearing. Jesus is silent. The sorrowful way has come to its end.
The crucifixion. Four brawny men who look like Judeans, and Judeans more worthy of the cross than the condemned men, certainly of the same category of scourgers, jump from a path onto the place of the execution. They are wearing short sleeveless tunics, and in their hands they are holding nails, hammers, and ropes, which they show to the condemned men scoffing at them. The crowd is excited with cruel frenzy. The centurion offers Jesus the amphora so that he may drink the anesthetic mixture of myrrhed wine, but Jesus refuses it. The two robbers instead drink a lot of it. Then the amphora, with a wide flared mouth, is placed near a large stone, almost on the edge of the summit. The condemned men are ordered to undress. The two robbers do so without shame. On the contrary, they amuse themselves, making obscene gestures towards the crowd, and in particular towards a group of priests, who are all white with their linen garments, and who have gone back to the lower open spaces little by little, taking advantage of their caste to creep up there. The priests have been joined by 2 or 3 Pharisees and other overbearing personages, whom hatred has made friends. And I see people I know, such as the Pharisees Johanan and Ishmael, the scribes Sadok and Eli of Capernaum. The executioners offer the condemned men 3 rags, so that they may tie them round their groins. The robbers take them, uttering the most horrible curses. Jesus, who strips himself slowly because of the pangs of the wounds, refuses it. He perhaps thinks that he can keep on the short drawers, which he had on also during the flagellation. But when he is told to take them off as well, he stretches out his hand to beg for the rag of the executioners to conceal his nakedness. He is really the annihilated one, to the extent of having to ask a rag of criminals. But Mary has noticed everything, and she has removed the long, thin white veil coverage, her head under her dark mantle, and on which she has already shed so many tears. She removes it without letting her mantle drop and gives it to John so that he may hand it to Longinus for her son. The centurion takes the veil without any objection, and when he sees that Jesus is about to strip himself completely, facing the side where there are no people, and thus turning towards the crowd, his back furrowed with bruises and blisters, and covered with sores and dark crusts that are bleeding again, he gives him his mother's linen veil. Jesus recognizes it and wraps it round his pelvis several times, fastening it carefully so that it may not fall off. And on the linen veil, so far soaked only with tears, the first drops of blood begin to fall, because many of the wounds just covered with blood clots have reopened again. And he stoops to take off his sandals and lay down his garments, and blood is streaming down again. Jesus now turns toward the crowd, and one who can thus see that also his chest, legs, and arms have all been struck by the scourges. At the height of his liver, there is a huge bruise, and under his left costal arch, there are 7 clear stripes in relief. ending with 7 small cuts bleeding inside, a violaceous circle, a cruel blow of a scourge in such a sensitive region of the diaphragm. His knees bruised by repeated falls that began immediately after he was captured and ended on Calvary are dark with hematomas, and the kneecaps are torn, partially the right one, by a large bleeding wound. The crowd scoff at him in chorus. "O handsome, the most handsome of the sons of men, the daughters of Jerusalem adore you." And then the tone of a psalm they intone. "My beloved is fresh and ready, and he known among 10,000. His head is purest gold, his locks are palm fronds, as silky as the feathers of ravens. His eyes are like 2 doves bathing in streams not of water, but of milk, in the milk of his orbits. His cheeks are beds of spices. His lips are purple lilies, distilling precious myrrh. His hands are rounded like the work of a goldsmith, ending in rosy hyacinths. His trunk is ivory veined with sapphires. His legs are perfect columns of white marble and bases of gold. His majesty is like that of Lebanon. He is more majestic than the tall cedar. His conversation is drenched with sweetness, and he is altogether delightful. And they laugh and shout also. The leper, the leper. So have you fornicated with an idol. If God has struck you so, have you mumbled against the saints of Israel, as Mary of Moses did? If you have been punished so, oh, the perfect one, are you the Son of God? Certainly not. You are the abortion of Satan. At least he, Mammon, is powerful and strong. You are in rags. You are powerless and revolting." The robbers are tied to the crosses, and they are carried to their places, one to the right, one to the left, with regard to the place destined for Jesus. They howl, swear, curse, particularly when the crosses are carried to the holes, and they hurt them, making the ropes cut into their wrists. Their oaths against God, the law, the Romans, the Judeans are hellish. It is Jesus' turn. He lies on the cross meekly. The 2 robbers were so rebellious that as the 4 executioners were not sufficient to hold them, some soldiers had to intervene to prevent them from kicking away the torturers who were tying their wrists to the cross. But no help is required for Jesus. He lies down and places his head where they tell him. He stretches out his arms and his legs, and he is told, as he is told, he only takes care to arrange his veil properly. Now his long, slender white body stands out against the dark wood and the yellow ground. 2 executioners sit on his chest to hold him fast. And I think of the oppression and the pain he must have felt under that weight. The 3rd one takes his right arm, holding him with one hand on the first part of his forearm, the other on the tips of his fingers. The 4th one, who already has in his hand the long, sharp-pointed quadrangular nail, ending with a round, flat head, as big as a large coin of bygone days, watches whether the hole already made in the wood corresponds to the radius ulnar joint of the wrist. It does. The executioners place the point of the nail on the wrist. He raises the hammer and gives the first stroke. Jesus, who has closed his eyes, utters a cry and has a contraction because of the sharp pain, and opens his eyes, flooding with tears. The pain he suffers must be dreadful. The nail penetrates, tearing muscles, veins, nerves, shattering bones. The right hand is now nailed. They pass on to the left one. The hole in the woods does not correspond to the carpus. So they take a rope, they tie it to the left wrist, and they pull it until the joint is dislocated, tearing tendons and muscles, besides lacerating the skin already cut into the ropes used to capture him. The other hand must suffer as well, because it is stretched as a consequence, and the hole in it widens round the nail. Now the beginning of the metacarpus near the wrist hardly arrives at the hole. They resign themselves and they nail the hand where they can. That is, between the thumb and the other fingers, just in the middle of the metacarpus. The nail penetrates more easily here, but with great pain, because it cuts important nerves, so that the fingers remain motionless, whilst those on the right hand have contractions and tremors that donate their vitality. But Jesus no longer utters cries. He only moans in a deep, hoarse voice, with his lips firmly closed, while tears of pain fall on the ground after falling on the wood. It is now the turn of his feet. At 2 meters and more from the foot of the cross, there is a small wedge, hardly sufficient for 1 foot. Both feet are placed on it to see whether it is the right spot. And as it is a little low and the feet hardly reach, they pull the poor martyr by his malleoli, so that the coarse wood of the cross rubs on the wounds and moves the crown that tears his hair once again and is on the point of falling. One of the executioners presses it down on his head again with a slap. Those who were sitting on Jesus now get up to move his knees, because Jesus, with an involuntary movement, withdraws his legs upon seeing the very long nail, which is twice as long and thick as those used for the hands, shine in the sunshine. They weigh on his flailed knees and press on his poor bruised shins, while the other 2 are performing the much more difficult operation of nailing 1 foot on top of the other, trying to combine the 2 joints of the tarsi. Although they try to keep the feet still, holding them by the malleoli and toes on the wedges, the foot underneath is shifted by the vibrations of the nail, and they have to almost unnail it, because the nail, which has pierced the tender parts and is already blunt, having pierced the right foot, is to be moved a little closer to the center. And they hammer and hammer and hammer. Only the dreadful noise of the hammer striking the head of the nail is heard. Because all cavalry is nothing but eyes and ears to perceive acts and noises and to rejoice. The hard noise of iron is accompanied by the low, plaintive lament of a dove, the hoarse groaning of Mary, who bends more and more at each stroke, as if the hammer wounded her, the martyr mother. And one understands that she is about to be crushed by such torture. Crucifixion is dreadful. Equal to flagellation with regard to pain, it is more cruel to be seen, because one sees the nails disappear in the flesh. But in compensation, it is shorter, whereas flagellation is enervating because of its duration. I think that the agony of Gethsemane, the flagellation, and the crucifixion are the most dreadful moments. They reveal all the torture of the Christ to me. His death relieves me because I say, it is all over, but they are not the end. They are the beginning of new sufferings. The cross is now dragged near the hole, and it jerks on the uneven ground, shaking the poor crucified. The cross is raised, and twice it slips out of the hands of those raising it. The first time it falls with a crash. The second time it falls on its right arm, causing terrible pain to Jesus, because the jerk he receives shakes his wounded limbs. But when they let the cross drop into its hole, and before being made fast with stones and earth, it sways in all directions, continuously shifting the poor body, hanging from the 3 nails. The suffering must be atrocious. All the weight of the body moves forward and downward, and the holes become wider, particularly the one of the left hand, and also the hole of the feet widens out, while the body drips more copiously. And if that of the feet trickles along the toes onto the ground and along the wound of the cross, that of the hands runs along the forearms, as the wrists are higher up than the armpits. Because the position, and it trickles down the sides from the armpits towards the waist. When the cross sways before being fastened, the crown moves, because the head falls back, knocking against the wood, and drives the thick knot of the thorns, and the end of the prickly crown into the shape of the neck. Then it lies again on the forehead, scratching it mercilessly. At long last, the cross is made fast, and there is only the torture of being suspended. They raise the robbers, who, once they are placed in vertical position, shout as if they were being flayed alive. Because of the torture of the ropes that cut into their wrists and that cause their hands to turn dark with veins, swollen like ropes. Jesus is silent. The crowd instead is no longer silent. The people resume bawling in a hellish way. Now the top of Golgotha has its trophy and its guard of honor. And the top there is the cross of Jesus, and the sides, the other 2 crosses. Halfway, a century of soldiers in fighting trim, placed all around the summit. Inside this circle are armed soldiers. There are the 10 dismounted soldiers, who threw dice for the garments of the condemned men. Longinus is standing upright between the cross of Jesus and the one on the right, and he seems to be mounting guard of honor for the martyr king. The other half century at rest is on the left path and on the lower open space, under the orders of Longinus, adjutant, awaiting to be employed in case of need. The indifference of the soldiers is almost total. Only an odd one now and again looks at the crucified men. Longinus instead watches everything with curiosity and interest. He makes comparisons and judges mentally. He compares the crucified men and the Christ in particular, and the spectators. His piercing eye does not miss any detail. And to see better, he shades his eye with his hand, because the sun must be annoying him. The sun is in fact strange. It is yellow-red like fire. Then the fire seems to go out all of the sudden, because of a huge cloud of pitch that rises from beneath the chains of the Judean mountains and soars swiftly across the sky. disappearing behind other mountains. And when the sun comes out again, it is strong, that the eye endures it with difficulty. While looking, he sees Mary just under the slope, with her tormented face raised towards her son. He calls one of the soldiers who are playing dice and says to him, "If his mother wants to come up with the son who is escorting her, let her come, escort her and help her." And Mary with John, who is believed to be her son, climbs the steps cut into the tufaceous rock, I think, and passes beyond the cordoned soldiers and goes to the foot of the cross, but a little aside, to be seen and see her Jesus. The crowd showers the most disgraceful abuses at her at once, associating her with her son in their curses. But with her trembling white lips, she tries only to comfort him with an anguished smile that wipes the tears, which no willpower can refrain.
The people, beginning with priests, scribes, Pharisees, Sadducees, Herodians, and the like, amuse themselves by going on a kind of roundabout, climbing the steep road, passing along the elevation at the end, and descending along the other road, or vice versa. And while they pass at the foot of the summit on the second open space, they do not fail to offer their blasphemous words as a compliment to the dying victim. All the baseness, cruelty, hatred, and folly which men are capable of expressing with their tongues is amply testified by those infernal mouths. The fiercest are the members of the temple with the assistance of the Pharisees. Well, you, the Savior of mankind, why do you not save yourself? Has your king Beelzebub abandoned you? Has he disowned you? Shout 3 priests. And a group of Judeans shout, you, who not more than 5 days ago, with the help of the demon, made the Father say, ha, that he would glorify you. How come you do not remind him to keep his promise? And 3 Pharisees add, blasphemer, he said that he saved the others with the help of God, and he cannot save himself. Do you want us to believe you? Then work the miracle. Hey, are you no longer able? Your hands are now nailed, and you are naked. And some Sadducees and Herodians say to the soldiers, watch his witchcraft. You who have taken his garments, he has the infernal sign within himself. A crowd howls in chorus, descend from the cross and we will believe you, you who want to destroy the temple. Fool, look at it over there, the glorious and holy temple of Israel. It is untouchable, O profaner, and you are dying. Other priests say, blasphemous, you the Son of God, come down from there then. Strike us by lightning if you are God. We are not afraid of you, and we spit at you. Others who are passing by shake their heads, saying, he can but weep. Save yourself if it is true that you are the chosen one. And the soldiers remark, so save yourself, burn to ashes this Subura of the Subura. Yes, you are the Subura of the empire, you Judean rabble. Do so, Rome will put you on capital and will worship you as a god. The priests and their accomplices say, the arms of women were more pleasant than those of the cross, were they not? But look, your, and they utter a disgraceful word, are already there waiting to receive you. You have the whole of Jerusalem as your matchmaker. And they hiss like snakes. Others throw stones, shouting, change these into bread, since you multiply loaves. Others, mimicking the hosannas of Palm Sunday, throw branches and shout, curses on him who comes in the name of the demon. Curses be his kingdom. Glory to Zion that cuts him off from the living. A Pharisee stands in front of the cross. He raises his hands in an indecent gesture and says, I entrust you to the God of Sinai. Did you say, now the God of Sinai is preparing you for the eternal fire? Why don't you call Jonah so that he may repay your kindness? Another one says, don't ruin the cross with the strokes of your head. It is to be used for your followers. And a whole legion of them will die on your cross. I swear it on Jehovah. And Lazarus will be the first one I'll put there. We shall see whether you free him from death now. Yes, let us go to Lazarus. Let us nail him on the other side of the cross. And parrot-like they speak slowly as Jesus did, saying, Lazarus, my friend, come out, unbind him and let him go. No, he used to say to Martha and Mary, his women, I am the resurrection and the life. Ha, the resurrection cannot drive death back, and the life is dying. There is Mary with Martha over there. Let us ask them where Lazarus is, and let us look for him. And they come forward toward the women, asking arrogantly, where is Lazarus? At his mansion? And while the other women, struck with terror, run behind the shepherds, Mary Magdalene comes forward, and finding in her grief the ancient boldness of her days of sin, she says, go, you will already find the soldiers of Rome in the mansion with 500 armed men of my land, and they will castrate you like old billy goats, destined to feed the slaves of millstones. Impudent, is that how you speak to the priests? Sacrilegious, filthy, cursed, turn around, on your backs I can see them, you have tongues of infernal flames. Mary's assertion sounds so certain that the cowards who are really struck with terror turn around. But if they have no flames on their shoulders, they have the sharp-pointed Roman lances at their backs. In fact, Longinus has given an order, and the 50 soldiers who are resting have come into action, and they prick the buttocks of the first Judeans they find. The latter run away, shouting, and the soldiers stop to block the entrances to the 2 roads and protect the open space. The Judeans curse, but Rome is the stronger. The Magdalene lowers her veil again. She had raised it to speak to the revilers and goes back to her place. The other women join her. But the robber on the left-hand side continues to insult from his cross. He seems to have summarized all the curses of the other people and repeats them all and ends by saying, "Save yourself and save us if you want people to believe you. You are the Christ, you're mad, the world belongs to crafty people, and God does not exist. I do. That is true, and everything is permitted to me. God, nonsense, invented to keep us quiet. Long live our egos. Man's ego alone is king and God." The other robber, who is at the right-hand side with Mary almost near his feet, and looks at her almost more than he looks at Jesus, and for some moments has been weeping, murmuring, "My mother," says, "Be silent. Do you not fear God even now that you suffer this pain? Why do you insult him who is good? And his torture is even greater than ours, and he has done nothing wrong." But the robber continues to curse. Jesus is silent, panting as a result of the effort he has to make because of his position, because of his fever and heart and breathing conditions, this consequence of the flagellation he suffered in such a violent form, and also of the deep anguish that has made him sweat blood. He tries to find some relief by reducing the weight on his feet, pulling himself up with his arms and hanging from his hands. Perhaps he does so also to overcome the cramp that tortures his feet and is relieved by the trembling of his muscles. But the same trembling is noticeable in the fibers of his arms, which are constrained in that position and must be frozen at their ends, because they are higher up and deprived of blood, which arrives at the wrists with difficulty and trickles down from the holes of the nails, leaving the fingers without circulation. Those of the left hand in particular are already cadaveric and motionless, bent toward the palm. Also the toes of the feet show their pain, especially the big toes move up and down and openly out, probably because their nerves have not been injured so seriously. And the trunk reveals all its pain with its movement, which is fast but not deep, and tires him without giving any relief. His ribs, wide and high as they are, because of the structure of this body is perfect, are now enlarged beyond measure, as a consequence of the position taken by the body and of the pulmonary edema that has certainly developed inside. And yet they do not serve to relieve the effort of breathing, all the more that the abdomen with its movement helps the diaphragm, which is becoming more and more paralyzed. And the congestion and asphyxia increase every minute, as is shown by the cyanotic color that emphasizes the lips, which the fever has made bright red, and by the red-violet streaks which tinge the neck along the turgid jugular veins, and widen out as far as the cheeks, toward the ears and temples, while the nose is thin and bloodless, and the eyes are sunken in a circle which is livid where no blood has trickled from the crown. Under the left costal arc, one can see the throbbing imparted by the point of the heart, an irregular but violent palpitation, and now and again, owing to an internal convulsion, the diaphragm has a deep pulsation, which is revealed by a total stretching of the skin for what it can stretch on that poor wounded dying body. The face already has the aspect we see in photographs of the Holy Shroud, with the nose diverged and swollen on one side, and the likeness is increased by the fact that the right eye is almost closed, owing to a swelling on this side. The mouth instead is open, with the wound on the upper lip by now turned into a crust. His thirst, caused by the loss of blood, by the fever and by the sun, must be burning, so much so that he, with automatic movements, drinks the drops of his perspiration and tears, as well as those of blood that run down from his forehead to his mustache, and he wets his tongue with them. The crown of thorns prevents him from leaning against the trunk of the cross to help the suspension on his arms and lighten the weight on his feet. His kidneys and all his spine are curved outward, detached from the cross, from his pelvis upward, owing to force of inertia that makes a body suspended like this hang forward. The Judeans driven beyond the open space do not stop insulting, and the unrepentant robber echoes their insults. The other one, who now looks at the mother with deeper and deeper compassion and weeps, answers him back sharply when he hears that she also is included in the insult. Be silent, remember that you were born of a woman, and consider that our mothers have wept because of their sons, and they were tears of shame because we are criminals. Our mothers are dead. I would like to ask mine to forgive me, but shall I be able? She was a holy woman. I killed her with the sorrow I gave her. I am a sinner. Who will forgive me? Mother, in the name of your dying son, pray for me. The mother for a moment raises her tortured face and looks at him, the poor wretch who, through the remembrance of his mother and the contemplation of the mother, moves toward repentance, and she seems to caress him with her kind, gentle eyes. Disma weeps louder, which raises even more the mockery of the crowd and of his companion. The former shout, "Very well, take her as your mother, so she will have 2 criminal sons." The latter aggravates the situation, saying, "She loves you because you are a smaller copy of her darling." Jesus speaks for the first time. "Father, forgive them because they do not know what they are doing." This prayer overcomes all fear in Disma. He dares to look at the Christ and says, "Lord, remember me when you are in your kingdom. It is just that I should suffer, but give me mercy and peace hereafter. I heard you speak once, and I foolishly rejected your word. I now repent, and I repent of my sins before you, the Son of the Most High. I believe that you come from God. I believe in your power. I believe in your mercy. Christ, forgive me in the name of your mother and of your most holy Father." Jesus turns round and looks at him with deep compassion, and he smiles a still beautiful smile with his poor tortured lips. He says, "I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise." The repentant robber calms down, and as he no longer remembers the prayers he learned when a child, he repeats an ejaculation, "Jesus, Nazarene, King of the Jews, have mercy on me." Jesus, Nazarene, King of the Jews, I hope in you. Jesus, Nazarene, King of the Jews, I believe in your divinity. The other robber continues cursing. The sky becomes duller and duller. Now the clouds hardly ever open to let the sun shine. On the contrary, they cluster on top of one another in leaden, white, greenish strati. They disentangle according to the caprices of a cold wind, which at times blows in the skies, then descends to the ground, and then drops again. And when it drops, the air is almost more sinister, sultry, and dull than when it hisses, blowing, biting, and fast. The light, previously exceedingly bright, is becoming greenish, and faces look strange. The profiles of the soldiers under their helmets and in their armor, which were previously shining and have now become rather tarnished in the greenish light and under an ashen gray sky, are so hard that they seem to be chiseled. The Judeans, the complexion, hair, and beards of whom are mostly brown, seem drowned people, so wan are their faces. The women look like statues of bluish snow because of their deadly paleness, which is accentuated by the light. Jesus seems to be turning ominously livid because of a beginning of putrefaction, as if he were already dead. His head begins to hang over his chest. His breath fails him rapidly. He shivers although he is burning with fever, and in his weakness he whispers the name that so far he has only uttered in the bottom of his heart. Mother, mother. He murmurs it in a low voice like a sigh, as if he were already lightly delirious and thus prevented from holding back what his will would not like to reveal. And each time Mary makes an unrestrainable gesture of stretching her arms, as if she wished to succor him. And the cruel people laugh at such pangs of him who is dying and of her who suffers agonies. Priests and scribes climb up again as far as the shepherds, who, however, are on the lower open space. And as the soldiers want to drive them back, they react, saying, "Are these Galileans staying here? We want to stay here as well, as we have to ascertain that justice is done to the very end, and from afar in this light we cannot see." In fact, many begin to be upset by the light that is enveloping the world, and some people are afraid. Also, the soldiers point to the sky and to a kind of cone that seems of slate, so dark it is, and that rises like a pine tree from behind the top of a mountain. It looks like a water spout. It rises and seems to produce darker and darker clouds, as if it were a volcano belching smoke and lava. It is in this frightening twilight that Jesus gives John to Mary and Mary to John. He lowers his head because the mother has gone closer to the cross to see him better, and he says, "Woman, this is your son. Son, this is your mother." Mary looks even more upset after this word, which is the will of Jesus, who has nothing to give his mother but a man. He who out of love for men deprives her of the man-God born of her. But the poor woman tries to weep only silently because it is impossible for her not to weep. Tears stream down her cheeks, notwithstanding all the effort to refrain them, even if on her lips there is a heartbroken smile to comfort him. Jesus' sufferings increase more and more, and the light fades more and more. It is in this sea-bottom light that Nicodemus and Joseph appear from behind some Judeans, and they say, "Step aside." "You are not allowed. What do you want?" ask the soldiers. "To pass. We are friends of the Christ." The chief priests turn around. "Who dare profess himself friend of the rebel?" ask the priests indignantly. And Joseph replies resolutely, "I, Joseph of Arimathea, the elder and noble member of the Supreme Council, and Nicodemus, the head of the Judeans, is with me. Those who side with the rebels are rebels, and those who take sides with murderers are murderers, Eleazar of Anas. I have lived as a just man, and now I am old and close to death. I do not want to become unjust, while heaven is already descending upon me and the eternal judge with it. And you, Nicodemus, I'm surprised. So am I, and of one thing only, that Israel is so corrupt that you cannot even recognize God anymore. You disgust me. Move aside then and let me pass. That is all I want. To become even more contaminated? If I have not become contaminated being with you, nothing else will ever contaminate me. Soldier, here is the purse and my pass." And he gives the decurion who is closest to him a purse and a waxed board. The decurion examines them and says to the soldiers, "Let the two men pass." And Joseph and Nicodemus approach the shepherds. I do not even know whether Jesus can see them in the thick fog that is getting thicker and thicker, and with his eyes that are already veiled by agony. But they see him weep, and they weep without any respect for public opinion, although the priests now abuse them. The sufferings are worse and worse. The body begins to suffer from the arching typical of tetanus, and the clamor of the crowd exasperates it. The death of fibers and nerves extend from the tortured limbs to the trunk, making breathing more and more difficult. Diaphragmatic contraction weak, and heart beating irregular. The face of Christ passes and turns from very deep red blushes to the greenish paleness of a person bleeding to death. His lips move with greater difficulty, because the overstrained nerves of the neck and of the head itself, that for dozens of times have acted as a lever for the whole body, pushing on the crossbar, spread the cramp along also to the jaw. His throat, swollen by the obstructed carotid arteries, must be painful and must spread its edema to the tongue, which looks swollen and slow in its movements. His back, even in the moments when the tetanizing contractions do not bend it in a complete arc from the nape of his neck to his hips, leaning as extreme points against the stake of the cross, bends more and more forward because the limbs are continuously weighed down by the burdens of the dead flesh. The people cannot see this situation very clearly because the light now is like dark ashes, and only those who are at the foot of the cross can see well. At a certain moment, Jesus collapses forward and downward as if he were already dead. He no longer pants. His head hangs inertly forward. His body from his hips upward is completely detached from the cross, forming an angle with its bar. Mary utters a cry. He is dead. A tragic cry that spreads in the dark air, and Jesus seems really dead. Another cry of a woman replies to her, and I see a bustle in the group of women. Then some 10 people go away holding something, but I cannot see who goes away. The foggy light is too faint. It looks as we are immersed in a cloud of very dense volcanic ash. It is not possible, shout some of the priests and Judeans. It is a simulation to make us go away. Soldier, prick him with your lance. It is good medicine to give his voice back to him. And as the soldiers do not do so, a volley of stones and clods of earth fly toward the cross, hitting the martyr and falling back on the armor of the Romans. The medicine, as the Judeans say ironically, works the wonder. Some of the stones have certainly hit the target, perhaps the wound of a hand or the head itself, because they were aiming high. Jesus moans pitifully and recovers his senses. His thorax begins to breathe again with difficulty, and his head moves from left to right, seeking where it may rest in order to suffer less, but finding nothing but greater pain.
with great difficulty, pressing once again on his tortured feet, finding strength in his will and only in it. Jesus stiffens on the cross. He stands upright as if he were a healthy man with all his strength. He raises his face, looking with wide eyes at the world stretched at his feet, at the faraway town, which one can see just indistinctly as a vague whiteness in the mist, and at the dark sky where every trace of blue and of light has disappeared. And to this closed, compact, low sky, resembling a huge slab of dark slate, he shouts in a loud voice, overcoming with his willpower and with the need of his soul, the obstacle of his swollen tongue and his odiamatos throat. Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. I hear him say so. He must feel that he is dying and in absolute abandonment by heaven. If he confesses his father's abandonment with such an exclamation. People laugh and deride him. They insult him, saying, God has nothing to do with you. Demons are cursed by God. Other people shout, let us see whether Elijah, whom he is calling, will come to save him. And others say, give him some vinegar that he may gargle his throat. It helps one's voice, Elijah or God, as it is uncertain what this madman wants are far away. A loud voice is required to make oneself heard, and they laugh like the hyenas or like demons. But no soldier gives him vinegar, and no one comes from heaven to give comfort. It is the solitary, total, cruel, also supernaturally cruel agony of the great victim. The avalanches of desolate grief which have already oppressed him at Gethsemane come back again. The waves of the sins of the world come back to strike the shipwrecked innocent, to submerge him in their bitterness. And above all, what comes back is the sensation, more crucifying than the cross itself, more despairing than any torture, that God has abandoned him and that his prayer does not rise to him. And it is the final torture, the one that accelerates death, because it squeezes the last drop of blood out of the pores. Because it crushes the remaining fibers of the heart. Because it ends the first knowledge of this abandonment has begun. Death. Because of that, at first cause, my Jesus died. O God, who have struck him for us. Because after your abandonment, through your abandonment, what does a person become? Either insane or dead. Jesus could not become insane because his intelligence was divine, and since intelligence is spiritual, it triumphs over the total trauma of him who God hath struck. So he became a dead man, the most holy dead man, the most innocent dead man. He who was the life was dead, killed by your abandonment and by our sins. The darkness became deeper. Jerusalem disappeared completely. The very slopes of Calvary seemed to vanish. Only the top is visible, as if darkness held it high up to receive the only and last surviving light, laying it as an offering with its divine trophy on a pool of liquid onyx, so that it may be seen by love and by hatred. And from the light, which is no longer light, comes the plaintive voice of Jesus, I am thirsty. A wind, in fact, is blowing, which makes even healthy people thirsty. A strong wind that now blows continuously and is full of dust, cold and frightening. And I think of what pain its violent gusts must have caused to the lungs, the heart, the throat of Jesus, and to his frozen, benumbed, wounded limbs. Everything has really combined to torture the martyr. A soldier goes towards a jar in which the assistants of the executioner have put some vinegar in with gall, so that with its bitterness it may increase the salivation of those condemned to capital punishment. He takes the sponge immersed in the liquid. He sticks it on a thin yet stiff cane, which is already available nearby, and offers the sponge to the dying victim. Jesus leans eagerly forward towards the approaching sponge. He looks like a starving baby seeking the nipple of its mother. Mary, who sees and certainly has such a thought, leaning on John, says with a moan, "Oh, I cannot give him even one of my tears. Oh, breast of mine, why do you not trickle milk? Oh God, why do you abandon us thus? A miracle for my son, who will lift me up, and that I may quench his thirst with my blood, since I have no milk." Jesus, who has greedily sucked the sour, bitter drink, makes a wry face in disgust. Above all, it must act as a corrosive on his wounded split lips. He withdraws, loses heart, abandons himself. All the weight of his body follows heavily on his feet and forward. His wounded extremities are the parts that suffer the dreadful pain as they are torn open by the weight of the body that abandons itself. He makes no further movement to alleviate such pain. His body, from his hips upwards, is detached from the cross and remains such. His head hangs forward so heavily that his neck seems hollowed in 3 places, at the throat, which is completely sunken, and at both sides of the sternum, cleodomastoid. He pants more and more, and interruptedly, and it sounds more like a death rattle. Now and again, a painful fit of coughing brings a light rosy foam to his lips, and the intervals between one expiration and the next one are becoming longer and longer. His abandon is now motionless. Only his thorax still heaves, but laboriously and with difficulty. Pulmonary paralysis is increasing more and more. And fainter, sounding like a child's wailing, comes the invocation, "Mother," and the poor wretch whispers, "Yes, darling, I am here." And when his sight becomes misty and makes him say, "Mother, where are you? I cannot see you anymore. Are you abandoning me as well?" And they are not even words, but just a murmur that can hardly be heard by her, who with her heart rather than with her ears receives every sigh of her dying son. She says, "No, no, son, I will not abandon you. Listen to me, my dear. Your mother is here. She is here. And she only regrets that she cannot come where you are." It is heartrending. And John weeps openly. Jesus must hear him weep, but he does not say anything. I think that his impending death makes him speak as if he were raving and that he does not even know what he says. And unfortunately, he does not even understand his mother's consolation and his favorite apostle's love. Longinus, who inadvertently is no longer standing at ease with his arms folded across his chest and one leg crossed over the other alternately to ease the long weight of his feet, and is now instead standing stiff at attention, his left hand on his sword, his right one held against his side, as if he were on the steps of the imperial throne, does not want to be influenced. But his face is affected in the effort of overcoming his emotions, and his eyes begin to shine with tears that only his iron disciple can refrain. Iron discipline can refrain. The other soldiers who were playing dice have stopped and have stood up, putting on helmets that have served to cast the dice, and they are near the little steps dug in the tufa, looking heedful and silent. The others are on duty and cannot move. They look like statues, but some of those who are closer to hear Mary's words mutter something beneath their lips and shake their heads. There is dead silence. Then, in utter darkness, the word, "Everything is accomplished," is clearly heard, and his death rattle grows louder and louder, with longer and longer pauses between one rattle and the next one. Time passes in such distressing rhythm. Life comes back when the air is pierced by the harsh breath of the dying victim. Life stops when the painful sound is no longer heard. One suffers hearing it, one suffers not hearing it. One says, "Enough of this suffering," and then one says, "Oh God, let it not be his last breath." All the Marys are weeping, with their heads leaning against the scarp, and their weeping is clearly heard because the crowd is now silent again to listen to the death rattles of the dying master. There is silence again, then the supplication pronounced with infinite kindness, with fervent prayer. Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. Further silence. Also, the death rattle becomes fainter. It is just a breath confined to his lips and throat. Then there is the last spasm of Jesus, a dreadful convulsion that seems to tear the body with 3 nails from the cross, rises 3 times from the feet to the head. Through all the poor tortured nerves, it heaves abdomen 3 times in an abnormal way, then leaves it after dilating it as if it were upsetting the viscera, and it drops and becomes hollow as it were empty. It heaves, swells, and contracts the thorax so violently. Then the skin sinks between the ribs, which stretch, appearing under the skin and reopening the wounds of the scourges. It makes the head fall back violently once, twice, 3 times, hitting the wood hard. It contracts all the muscles of the face in a spasm, accentuating the deviation of the mouth to the right. It opens wide and dilates the eyelids, under which one can see the eyeballs rolling and the sclerotic appearing. The body is all bent. In the last of the 3 contractions, it is a drawn arch, which vibrates and is dreadful to look at, and then a powerful cry, unimaginable in that exhausted body, bursts forth, rending the air. The loud cry mentioned by the Gospels and in the first part of the word, "Mother," and nothing else. His head falls on his chest. His body leans forward. The trembling stops. He breathes no more. He has breathed his last. The earth replies to the cry of the murdered innocent with a frightening rumble. From 1,000 bugle horn giants seem to give out only one sound, and on that terrible chord there are the isolated rending notes of lightning that streaks the sky in all directions, falling on the town, on the temple, on the crowd. I think that some people were struck by lightning because the crowd was struck directly. The lightning is the only irregular light that enables one to see at intervals. And immediately afterwards, while the volley of thunderbolts still continues, the earth is shaken by a cyclonic whirlwind. The earthquake and the tornado together to give an apocalyptic punishment to the blasphemers. The summit of Golgotha trembles and quakes like a plate in the hands of a madman because of the subsaltory and undulatory shocks that shake the three crosses so violently they seem on the point of being overturned. Longinus, John, the soldiers grab whatever they can, as best they can not to fall. But John, while grasping the cross with one arm, with the other supports Mary, who both, because of her grief and unsteadiness, has leaned on his chest. The other soldiers, and in particular those on the side sloping downhill, have had to take shelter in the center to avoid being thrown down the precipice. The robbers howl with terror. The crowd howls even more and would like to run away, but it is not possible. People fall on top of the other. They tread on one another. They fall into fissures of the ground. They hurt themselves. They roll down the slope as if they have gone mad. The earthquake and the tornado recur 3 times. And there is the absolute immobility of a dead world. Only flashes of lightning, without the rumble of thunder, still streak the sky, illuminating the scene of the Jews fleeing in every direction, at their wits' end, their hands stretched forward or raised to the sky, at which they had so far sneered, and of which they are now afraid. Darkness is mitigated by a dim light, which increases by the silent magnetic lightning, enables one to see that many are lying on the ground. I do not know whether they are dead or fainted. A house is on fire inside the walls, and the flames rise up straight in the still air, a bright red spot in the gray-green atmosphere. Mary raises her head from John's chest and looks at her Jesus. She calls him, as she cannot see him well in the dim light, and her poor eyes are full of tears. She calls him 3 times. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. It is the first time that she calls him by his name since she has been on Calvary. Then, as a flash forms a kind of crown over the top of Golgotha, she sees him motionless, all bent forward, with his head hanging so much forward and to the right that his cheek touches his shoulder and his chin rests on his ribs. And she understands. She stretches out her hands in the dark air and shouts, "My son, my son, my son." She then listens. Also, her mouth is open. She seems to be wanting to hear also with it, as her eyes are wide open to see. She cannot believe that her Jesus is no longer. John, who has also looked and heard, and who understood that everything is over, embraces Mary, and tries to take her away, saying he no longer suffers. But before the apostle finishes his sentence, Mary, who has understood, frees herself. She turns round, she bends towards the ground, she covers her eyes with her hands and shouts, "I no longer have my son." She then staggers and would fall if John did not hold her against his heart, and he then sits down on the ground to sustain her on his chest, more easily until the Marys no longer held back by the upper circle of armed soldiers, because since the Jews have run away, the Roman soldiers have gathered in the open space below, commenting on the event, replaced the apostle near the mother. The Magdalene sits where John was, and she almost lays Mary on her knees, holding her between her arms and her breast, kissing her deadly pale face, which is reclined on her compassionate shoulder. Martha and Susanna, with a sponge and linen cloth soaked in vinegar, moisten her temples and nostrils, while her sister-in-law Mary kisses her hands, calling her in a heart-rending voice. And as soon as Mary opens her eyes again and casts a glance that her grief makes, so to say, dull, she says to her, "Daughter, my beloved daughter, listen. Tell me that you see me. I am your Mary. Don't look at me so." And as the first sob opens Mary's throat and her first tears begin to fall, the good Mary of Alphaeus says, "Yes, weep here with me, as if you were near a mother, my poor holy daughter." And when she hears her say, "Oh, Mary, Mary, have you seen?" she moans, "Yes, I have. But daughter, oh, daughter." And the elderly Mary can find no other words and weeps. She weeps disconsolately, echoed by all other women, that is, Martha and Mary, John's mother, and Susanna. The other pious women are no longer there. I think that they have gone away, and the shepherds with them, when the feminine cry was heard.
Eternal Father, I offer you the body and blood, soul and divinity of your dearly beloved Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, in atonement for our sins and those of the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. For the sake of his sorrowful passion, have mercy on us and on the whole world. O my Jesus, forgive us our sins, save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven, especially those most in need of your mercy. Amen. Holy God, Holy Mighty One, Holy Immortal One, have mercy on us and on the whole world. Holy God, Holy Mighty One, Holy Immortal One, have mercy on us and on the whole world. Holy God, Holy Mighty One, Holy Immortal One, have mercy on us and on the whole world. Jesus, we trust in you. Amen. The soldiers are speaking in low voices to one another. Have you noticed the Judeans? They were afraid now, and they were beating their breasts. The priests were the most terrorized. What a fright! I have seen other earthquakes, but never like this one. Look, the ground is full of fissures, and a whole stretch of the long way has slid down over there, and there are bodies under it. Leave them, so many snakes less. Oh, another fire in the country. But is he really dead? Can't you see? Do you doubt it? Joseph and Nicodemus appear from behind the rock. They had certainly taken shelter there behind the protection of the mountain to save themselves from the thunderbolts. They go to Longinus. We want the corpse. Only the proconsul can grant it. Go quick, because I heard that the Judeans want to go to the praetorium to obtain permission to fracture his legs. I would not like them to disfigure his body. How do you know? A report of the ensign. Go, I will wait. The two men rush down the steep road and disappear. It is at this moment that Longinus approaches John and in a low voice says something to him which I do not understand. Then he makes a soldier give him a lance. He looks at the women who are all attending Mary, who is slowly recovering her strength. They have all their backs toward the cross. Longinus places himself in front of the crucified. He ponders carefully how to deal the blow, and he strikes it. The lance penetrates deeply from the bottom upward, from right to left. John, wavering between the desire to see and the horror of seeing, makes a wry face for a moment. It is done, my friend, says Longinus, and he ends, better so, as for a night and without fracturing bones, he was really a just man. A lot of water and just a trickle of blood, already tending to clot, drip from the wound. I say drip. They only come out trickling from the neat cut that remains motionless, whereas, had there been any breathing, it would have opened and closed with the movement of the thorax and abdomen. While on Calvary, everything remains in this tragic situation. I join Joseph and Nicodemus, who are going down along a shortcut to gain time. They are almost at the bottom when they meet Gamaliel, an unkempt Gamaliel, with no headgear, no mantle, with his magnificent garments soiled with mold and torn by bramble. A Gamaliel who is running, climbing, and panting, with his hands in his thin, very grizzled hair of an elderly man. They speak to one another without stopping. Gamaliel, you? You, Joseph? Are you leaving him? No, I am not, but how come you are here in that state? Dreadful things. I was in the temple. The sign, the temple door unhinged, the purple hyacinth veil is hanging torn. The Holy of Holies is open. There is anathema upon us. He has spoken while running toward the summit, driven mad by the test. The two men look at him go. They look at each other. They say together, "These stones will shudder at my last words." He had promised him. They hasten their pace toward the town. In the country between the mountain and the walls and beyond them, many people looking idiotic are wandering in the still dim light. They howl, weep, and lament. Some say his blood has rained fire. Some exclaim, Jehovah has appeared in the midst of the lightning to curse the temple. Some moan, the sepulchres, the sepulchres. Joseph gets hold of a man who is striking his head against the walls and calls him by his name, dragging him as he enters the town. "Simon, what are you saying?" "Leave me. You are dead too, all dead, all outside, and they curse me." "He has gone mad," says Nicodemus. They leave him and they hasten toward the praetorium. The town is a prey to terror. People roam, beating their breasts. People who jump backwards or turn round frightened upon hearing a voice or steps behind them. In one of the many dark archivolts, the apparition of Nicodemus dressed in white wool, because in order to be quicker he has taken off his dark mantle on Golgotha, causes a fleeing Pharisee to utter a cry of terror. He then realizes that it is Nicodemus, and he clings to his neck with a strange effusion, shouting, "Don't curse me. My mother appeared to me and said, 'Be cursed forever.'" And then he collapses on the ground, moaning, "I'm afraid, I'm afraid." They are all mad, say the two men. They arrive at the praetorium, and it is only here, while waiting to be received by the proconsul, that Joseph and Nicodemus understand the reason for so much terror. Many sepulchres have been opened by the quake, and there were people who swore that they had seen skeletons come out of them, and that for a moment they resumed human appearance and were going about accusing and cursing those who were guilty of the deicide. I leave them in the entrance hall of the praetorium, while Jesus' two friends enter without so many stupid horrors and fears of contamination, and I go back to Calvary, joining Gamaliel, who by now exhausted is climbing the last few meters. He is proceeding, striking his breast, and when he arrives at the first of the two open spaces, he throws himself on the ground, face downward, a long white form on the yellowish ground, and he says, moaning, the sign, tell me that you forgive me. A whisper even, only a whisper to tell me that you hear me and forgive me." I understand that he thinks that Jesus is still alive. And he changes his mind only when a soldier pushing him with his lance says, "Get up and be silent. It is of no use. You should have thought of that previously. He is dead. And I, a heathen, am telling you, this man, who you have crucified, was really the Son of God." "Dead? Are you dead?" "Oh." Gamaliel raises his terrorized face. He tries to see as far up as the top in the twilight. He cannot see much, but he can see enough to realize that Jesus is dead, and he sees the compassionate group that is consoling Mary, and John standing on the left side of the cross and weeping, and Longinus standing straight on the right side, solemn in his respectful posture. He kneels down, stretches his arms out, and weeping says, it was you. We can no longer be forgiven. We have asked your blood upon us." And it cries to heaven, and heaven curses us. "Oh, but you were mercy. I say to you, I, the destroyed Rabbi of Judah, your blood on us, for pity's sake. Sprinkle us with it, because only your blood can impetrate forgiveness for us." And he weeps. And then in a lower voice he confesses his torture. "I have the requested sign, but ages and ages of spiritual blindness are upon my interior sight. and against my present will rises the voice of my proud thought of the past. Have mercy on me, light of the world. Let one of your rays descend on the darkness that did not understand you. I am the old Judean, faithful to what I thought was justice, and it was error. I am now a barren land, no longer with any of the ancient trees of the ancient faith, without any seed or stalk of the new faith. I am an arid desert. Work the miracle of making a flower that has your name spring up in this poor heart of an obstinate Israelite. Since you are the liberator, come into my poor thought, which is a prisoner of formulas. Isaiah says so. He paid for sinners and took upon himself the sins of many. Oh, alas, also mine, Jesus Nazarene. He stands up, he looks at the cross, which is becoming neater and neater in the light that is clearing up, and then he goes away, stooping, aged, destroyed. And on Calvary there is once again silence, just broken by Mary's weeping. The two robbers, worn out by fear, no longer speak. Nicodemus and Joseph arrive back running, and they say that they have Pilate's permission. But Longinus, who is not too trusting, sends a horse soldier to the proconsul to learn what he has to do with regard to the two robbers. The soldier goes and comes back with a gallop, with the order in hand, over Jesus, and breaks the legs of the other two by will of the Jews. Longinus calls the 4 executioners, who are cravenly crouching under the rock, still terrorized by what has happened, and orders them to give the robbers the death blow with the club, which takes place without any protest by Disma, to whom the blow of the club, delivered to his heart after striking his knees, breaks in half on his lips the name of Jesus in a death rattle. The other robber utters horrible curses. Their death rattles are lugubrious. The 4 executioners would also like to take care of Jesus, taking him down from the cross, but Joseph and Nicodemus do not allow them. Also Joseph takes off his mantle and tells John to do likewise, and to hold the ladders while they climb them with levers and tongs. Mary stands up trembling, supported by the women, and she approaches the cross. In the meantime, the soldiers, having fulfilled their task, go away, and Longinus, before descending beyond the lower open space, turns round from the height of his black horse to look at Mary and at the crucified. Then the noise of the hooves resounds on the stones and that of the weapons against the armor, and fades away in the distance. The left palm is unnailed. The arm falls along the body, which is now hanging semi-detached. They tell John to climb up as well, leaving the ladders to the women. And John, after climbing up where Nicodemus was previously, passes Jesus' arm around his neck and holds it so, hanging completely on his shoulder, embraced at the waist by his arm and held by the tips of his fingers not to touch the horrible gash of the left hand, which is almost open. When the feet are unnailed, John has to make a great effort to hold and support the body of his master between the cross and his own body. Mary has already placed herself at the foot of the cross, sitting with her back against it, ready to receive her Jesus in her lap. But the unnailing of the right arm is the most difficult operation, despite all of John's efforts, and the body is hanging completely forward, and the head of the nail is deeply sunk into the flesh. And as they do not want to make the wound worse, the 2 compassionate men work hard. At last the nail is seized with the tongs and pulled out gently. John has been holding Jesus all the time by the armpits with his head hanging on his shoulder, while Nicodemus and Joseph get hold of him, one at the thighs, the other at the knees, and they cautiously come down the ladders. When on the ground, they would like to lay him on the sheet that they have spread on their mantles, but Mary wants him. She has opened her mantle, letting it hang on one side, and she is sitting with her knees rather apart to form a cradle for her Jesus. While the disciples are turning round to get her son to her, the crowned head falls back, and the arms hang down toward the ground, and the wounded hands would rub on the soil if the pity of the pious women did not hold them up to prevent that. He is now in his mother's lap, and looks like a big tired child who is asleep all cuddled up. Mary is holding him with her right arm around the shoulders of her son, and her left one stretched over the abdomen to support him, also by the hips. Jesus' head is resting on his mother's shoulder, and she calls him. She calls him with a heart-rending voice. She then detaches him from her shoulder and caresses him with her left hand. She takes and stretches out his hands, and, before folding them on his dead body, she kisses them and weeps on their wounds. Then she caresses his cheeks, particularly where they are bruised and swollen. She kisses his sunken eyes, his mouth lightly twisted to the right and half open. She would like to tidy his hair as she had tidied his beard encrusted with blood, but in doing so she touches the thorns. She stings herself trying to remove that crown, and she wants to do it by herself with the only hand which is free, and she rejects everybody saying, "No, no, I will, I will." And she seems to be holding the tender head of a newborn baby with her fingers, so delicately does she do it. And when she succeeds in removing the torturing crown, she bends to cure all the scratches of the thorns with her kisses. With a trembling hand, she parts his ruffled hair, she tidies it and weeps, speaking in a low voice, and with her fingers she wipes the tears that drop on the cold body covered with blood, and she thinks of cleaning it with her tears and her veil, which is still around Jesus' loins, and she pulls one end of it toward herself and begins to clean and dry the holy limbs with it, and she continually caresses his face, then his hands and his bruised knees, and then reverts to drying his body, on which endless tears are dropping. And while doing so, her hand touches the gash on his chest. Her little hand, covered with a linen veil, enters almost completely into the large hole of the wound. Mary bends to see in the dim light which has formed, and she sees. She sees the chest torn open and the heart of her son. She utters a cry then. A sword seems to be splitting her heart. She shouts and then throws herself on her son, and she seems dead too. They succor and console her. They want to take her divine dead son away from her. And as she shouts, where will I put you? In which place safe and worthy of you?" Joseph, all bent in respectful bow, his open hand pressed against his chest, says, "Take courage, O woman. My sepulchre is new and worthy of a great man. I give it to him. And my friend here, Nicodemus, has already taken the spices to the sepulchre as he wishes to offer them. But I beg you, as it is getting dark, let us proceed. It is preparation day. Be good, O holy woman." Also John and the women beg her likewise, and Mary allows her son to be removed from her lap, and she stands up distressed while they envelop him in a sheet, begging, "Oh, do it gently." Nicodemus and John at the shoulders, Joseph at the feet, they lift the corpse, enveloped not only in the sheet, but resting also on the mantles, which act as a stretcher, and they set out down the road. Mary, supported by her sister-in-law and by the Magdalene, goes down toward the sepulchre, followed by Martha, Mary of Zebedee and Susanna, who have picked up the nails, the tongs, the crown, the sponge, and the cane. On Calvary remain the three crosses. The central one is bare, and the other two have their living trophies who are dying.